Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask the Experts. In this session, we will be tackling the Sales Cloud CRM. My name is James Ellis and I'm the marketing coordinator here at Couch & Associates. We're a marketing technology company based in Toronto with offices in the US and the UK, and we provide a full suite of services to digitally empower firms. To cover as many questions as possible during the webinar, we have grouped questions in together and aligned on topics to address. Therefore, if we don't address your question directly, please reach out and we will continue the conversation. We try to keep things a bit more informal and conversational during these sessions. So if you would like additional detail on what we discuss, then please let us know. Although we ask for questions during the registration process, this conversation may spark some additional thoughts. So feel free to ask those questions in the GoToWebinar chat and we will address them if appropriate. Each of our panelists today have been with Couch & Associates for over 6 years, with experience and certifications across marketing automation and Salesforce CRM. Dan Height and James Papke are senior marketing consultants who work with our clients to design and execute solutions, and Abrar Ali is a senior technology manager who leads the development group. You should be able to see today's topics on your screen. Firstly, it's demand unit waterfall. Here we received a question about how to implement the SiriusDecisions model in Salesforce. There have been many versions over time, and there has been a recent change to support the newest model that we will discuss. Then we have Salesforce development best practices. In this topic, we'll be answering how our team performs Salesforce development. This will be useful for those who do Salesforce development themselves or those who work with the development team. Impactful new features is the third topic. Here we'll discuss features that have recently been released or in the pipeline and are punching above their weight class in terms of value that they bring to an organization. Lastly is mixed bag Salesforce admin tips. This will be a mix of admin tips, tricks, and recommended custom fields for you to add to your tool belt. Without further ado, let's get on to topic 1, which is demand unit waterfall.
Thank you very much, James. So this is an interesting topic and very timely. So with the spring 2020 release, there was actually a functionality change in Salesforce that really helps support the newest version of the demand unit waterfall. And so that change is that the opportunity contact role has become a first-class object. So technically what that means is that the opportunity contact role on the object, you can make custom fields, you can add triggers, workflows, and validation rules. So it really opens up a world of customization to the opportunity contact role that people previously had a lot of friction with. So quick background on what the demand unit waterfall is. So probably everyone that's ever worked for especially a B2B company before has heard the term MQL. So that's coming out of the SiriusDecisions model. So back in 2006, they launched the initial demand waterfall, which quickly became the gold standard and methodology for defining key sales processes and handoff points, as well as improving the alignment between sales and marketing. Then over the next 6 years, the market evolved and there was a rise in inbound marketing and an awareness that sales is creating leads and a lot of automation is creating leads. So there was a re-architected demand waterfall. And so the latest iteration was developed in 2017, and it's really focused on the changes in business and process around the emphasis on account-based selling and account-based marketing. So the last version is called the demand unit waterfall. And so in the demand unit waterfall, we have demand units that are comprised of buying groups that are activated to find solutions to business needs that matches the selling organization's solutions. So if we look at what a demand unit is in this scenario and we bring that back into Salesforce, so the opportunity contact role object is considered the buying group object, and it's essentially connected to the opportunity. And so through this object, users can add contacts and track the holistic account throughout the sales process. So the Spring 20 update allows marketing and sales and teleservices to attach contacts and opportunities to complete the buying group, and with the appropriate business need, really customize the buying group to the organization's model. And that is it.
All right, thank you, James. Let's get on to Salesforce development best practices, and I believe Bra is tackling this one for us.
Thanks a lot, James. So today I'm going to be speaking about, I'm going to be speaking about the Salesforce development best practices. Some of this is in relation to how Salesforce recommends that development be conducted in their environment and how we internally do it as well. Can we move on to the next slide? Thanks. Perfect. So this, in a nutshell, is basically the overall development process that any development team would follow while they're developing against the Salesforce environment. To start it off, on the left of the screen, you'll see that it starts off with ideas that are essentially then pushed into a backlog. From the backlog, the ideas are picked up by the development team, and they develop against those specific items. They also conduct extensive testing to ensure that the features or the ideas that are being developed against fulfill the business requirements. And once that's done, then they're pushed into production. A couple of things to note here, which are specific to Salesforce, is the environmental management, which is basically the different types of sandbox environments that Salesforce provides. And we'll talk a bit about these and how they tie into the development process in a bit. And then the second part here is agile methodology, which is the actual development methodology that is recommended by Salesforce and is what we follow internally as well. So on the screen here, what we're looking at is basically an overall flow for the agile process. And just to kind of give a bit of a background here, agile methodology, there's traditionally people have used Waterfall, which is a little bit different, and it's more, in my opinion, it's more kind of constrained. Where agile benefits you is the fact that essentially agile helps you to address your business needs faster, and also allows for more flexibility if business needs change in terms of user feedback. And that will make more sense once I go through the process here. So the agile process essentially means that the dev team is continuously developing for your end users. The end users essentially provide feedback upon what is being developed, and then that feedback is taken and put into a backlog. And from that backlog, a business user will come in and will then start to prioritize those items based off of whatever their needs are. Once that prioritization is complete, then depending on the capacity, the development team will start to work on the items and will start to work from the highest priority, and will basically end up running sprint cycles of 2 to 4 weeks, depending on and then once the dev work is complete during a particular sprint cycle, the release will then go into UAT, which is user acceptance testing. And then once that is complete, it eventually goes into deployment. A deployment cycle or like a release cycle in Agile is usually every 2 to 4 weeks, and they have to be aligned with your development sprint cycles in whichever way you end up setting them up. Next slide, thanks. So as I talked about initially, Salesforce also provides a bunch of sandbox environments, and there are 4 types of sandbox environments that people have access to: Developer, Developer Pro, Partial Copy, and Full. Every instance has developer sandboxes. The other 2, Developer and Developer Pro, the other 2 are available at an additional cost, depending on whatever kind of licensing that you have. Just to go over some details around each of these different types of sandbox environments. So Developer and Developer Pro, they're essentially configuration sandboxes, which means that any of the changes that are made within the setup menu within your production environment are carried over into these sandboxes, but they do not contain any production data, and they can be refreshed once a day. The partial copy sandbox is similar to Developer Pro, but you have the additional capability to bring over any objects that you want from your production environment. You can choose all objects if you want to bring them all over, but then you'll be limited to only bringing in 10,000 records per object. And you also have a high limit of 5 gigs, which is like the overall space limit. So you'll be subject to that. And then the refresh limit for partial copy sandbox is every 5 days. And then lastly, your full copy is essentially, it's a full replica of your production environment, and it can only be refreshed every 29 days. In the past, I've seen that happen to us as well internally, where sometimes when you refresh your full copy sandbox, you'll see problems with like the refresh time. And if you end up seeing that, one of the best ways to circumvent that is to reduce the number of objects that you're copying into your full copy sandbox, and that can help speed that up. And then just some general things about sandboxes. You can't really develop Apex code in a Salesforce production organization. So if you're trying to implement Apex code, then it has to be developed in Sandbox, and then it has to follow, it's got to be tested in Sandbox, and then it has to be pushed into production using a jade set. Sandboxes by default are set to not allow the sending of emails. So if you've got a process that you're testing out where you're deploying emails to users, then you have to essentially change that configuration. And then sites and service addresses, for example, features like web to case, web to lead, email to lead, these are very specific to each Sandbox environment. So you will have to configure them separately. And then a couple of things to note is the fact that IDs do change for new objects, records, and fields that are created in Sandbox. So they will differ from whatever you have in production, which means that when you're developing against it in your Apex code, it's always a good idea to use the developer name as opposed to hard coding IDs in there, because then that will be problematic once you move them over. And then some of the use cases for sandboxes in general, like this ties back to the development process that I was talking about. So Dev and Dev Pro are best used for development, and then Dev QA, like your own, like stuff like unit testing, testing validation rules and stuff like that. Partial copy is best used for integration and batch data testing, as well as training and UAT. Full copy is best used for performance testing, because it has all of your data, and it's your your gold standard testing that you'll be doing. Can we move to the next slide? Oh, I think we probably missed a testing cycle. But what I was going to do was I was going to talk about just going to touch up on the use cases for sandboxes and expanding that a little bit. Was basically within the Developer Pro, like a dev sandbox. That's where you'll write your code, you'll perform your unit tests, and evaluate those outcomes. These tests can include stuff like, oh, there we go, perfect. Within the development part of this diagram, that's where you can essentially conceptualize having your dev QA, like your dev developer and developer pro sandbox. So that means that that's where you write your code, you perform your unit tests, and stuff like you can test stuff like compilation, validation logic, workflows, making sure that whatever Apex code you're going to be transitioning to production follows code coverage and stuff like that. So if your tests fail here, then you have to refactor your code and start from and continue development. Once you pass from development, like once all your tests there have passed, you move on to quality assurance, where you perform more tests, and these are mostly tests like functional testing, performance testing. This is where you would involve your full copy and your partial copy sandbox. And then once that is done, you will take whatever you have within your full copy sandbox, and you'll have a release manager who's going to look at that shippable product and say, yes, this completely fulfills our business requirements. And then you eventually ship that product into production. And then you go back to square one, which is taking a look at your backlog and continuously developing. And that's it.
Thanks, Abra, for that detailed explanation. I think we'll give you sorry about that. That's my alarm going off. Let's hand over to Dan to talk about impactful new features.
Great, thanks, James. I'm going to touch on a couple of new features here. There's one I'd like to actually discuss. It was on the spring 2020 release, so it's been in a lot of your releases for a little while now. But I thought it'd be nice to bring it up anyways, just to basically refresh some memories. It's the ability to clone with related. So users are now going to have the ability to clone campaigns and opportunities along with all related records. So what this means in practice is it'll be on page layout when you add it there. It's a new button action, and it's going to allow people an easy way to clone all of their campaigns and opportunities along with related records. So with opportunities, this is any related products, contact roles, and so forth. Campaigns, some related objects include campaign member statuses. And I know for a lot of you out there, it's going to be a time saver. If you're running recurring campaigns, it's a no-brainer here. Quick comment here, though, if you want to be using this new functionality, you need permissions enabled on the object and read access to the record in order to perform that clone. Let's move on to number 2. All right, so flows. So let me preface this here. So Salesforce has been deploying continuous improvements to flows. It's part of an ongoing effort by them to bring flexibility and functionality into line with that of Process Builder. So the first item I'm going to discuss was a Spring 20 release. Essentially, that's expanded control over flow triggers. That's how and when you are triggering these flows. And in particular, it was a record changed flow. What that means is you can now set flows to trigger before or after a record has been created or updated. This dramatically increases the precision with which you can target your flows. And the second item, again, the last Spring 20 release item I'm going to mention was the ability to schedule activation. So keeping in on the theme of flows here, I'm going to move over to the Winter 21 release. And for those of you who are not aware, this update started this past weekend, and it will continue over the next few weekends. I believe should be wrapped up by around middle of October for all the remaining orgs. And again, I want to do some quick call outs here in terms of flows, continuing to improve the power of that function. There's a new change record trigger, and this one's very valuable. You can now trigger a flow upon record deletion. Previously, this required Apex code to accomplish. So now you can simply manage that through a flow, which is great for just simple housekeeping items and triggering notifications on record deletion. One other improvement to the flow is you can now activate upon specific conditional requirements being met. Here's another example where flows are starting to catch up with the flexibility of Process Builder. And then finally, if you want to jump ahead to the next slide, please. Let's go one more. So this is the what they're calling auto layout mode. When creating a new flow, you'll now be able to select from the original freedom mode or this new auto layout mode. And what you're seeing there on the screen is program path and connectors are being manually managed. The idea is just to make things a little bit cleaner from a UI perspective. Interesting to call out here, for those people who use Pardot's Engagement Studio, this is almost a one-to-one replication, so you should feel at home. And for people who use Marketing Cloud's Journey Builder, you'll also have no trouble recognizing the UI and making a seamless transition. All right, can we go to feature number 3? So all features I'm going to mention from now on are for the currently ongoing Winter 21 release. So a quick one to call out here is there's now a button available in Fields and Relationships menu when you're on an object. From there, you can actually access any deleted fields, view them, and then either permanently erase them or restore them. So it's a small but a nice change. Let's go to number 4, please. So this one's pretty cool actually. When you're in an opportunity list view using Lightning, you can actually see changes to opportunity amounts and close dates through the UI. They're going to be color coded, as you can tell. There's some green items and some red items, as well as there's an easy rollover access to further details. This is going to be of particular interest to sales managers who are looking for a quick way to digest some movement on from their sales team. All right, interactive email builder. So we're looking at a brand new WYSIWYG editor. That's what you see is what you get editor. And it's going to be available to create email templates within Salesforce. Somewhere where Salesforce was lacking a little bit previously, but this should definitely help with template creation moving forwards. And again, just want to call out that for those people who use Pardot, this is almost a one-to-one translation of that editor. So for a lot of people, this should look pretty familiar. For those of you without any Pardot experience, it is using the Lightning app builder layout still. So again, it's pretty native, and I'm thinking this will be quite valuable for those organizations that will be using it. All right, number 6, please. Einstein scoring. So this one's a great little win here. So previously, lead and opportunity scoring through Einstein was a paid feature. That has been removed. It's now accessible to all customers once it's been released in your org. And there are some improvements as well. For the opportunity scoring side, you can exclude certain records and fields from your calculations, which is a nice thing to have. And on the lead scoring, whereas previously you needed, I believe it was around 1,000 new leads and a number of lead conversions prior to being able to activate it, you can now turn this new lead scoring feature on as soon as it's activated in your system. So definitely something that everybody has access to now and should probably be taking a look into. And finally, thank you, Salesforce Anywhere. So this is obviously it's being built to address this new world we're all working in. It's a real-time collaboration tool, so we can use video and chat to work together, something that's obviously irreplaceable today. Now, I know a lot of us at our various businesses use an application along these lines, but there are some tools, features of the Salesforce Anywhere that kind of make it very valuable for this purpose. And namely, it's integrated with Einstein, and it allows additional features like Salesforce alerts, as well as in-app linking. It's very easy for you to say, call up a coworker, start a video call, reference a field with them, and be able to highlight it on the screen. Something that can be a little bit more challenging with some of the screen sharing applications we have today. Should point out though, this is in beta still, so if you're going to be interested in checking this out, reach out to your sales rep, probably would be the greatest person, and get your name on that list. That's it for me, James.
Thank you, Dan. There's some very useful features on there and some good tips for people who are still getting to grips with them. Right, now we are on to the final topic, and knowing this team, I'm sure we're about to get some very useful tips. So I'll hand back over to you guys.
Thank you very much. So as somebody who takes over or works within other clients' orgs frequently, validation rules is one of the most simple yet impactful businesses or business processes you can do well, and makes for a better user experience. So instead of a super basic validation rule where everything is confusing for not only for yourself, but for the admin who just took over, I recommend that when you write your validation rule messages, explain 3 things to the user. One is what can't be done, although it might seem obvious, recommunicating that back to that person makes it clear what's trying to be done, why it cannot be done, and then what must be done in order to properly save the record. So an example of that being let's say there's a validation rule that prevents somebody from close lost, setting an opportunity to close lost, unless there is a lost reason field populated on the opportunity. So the message, as you can see on the screen, would be something like, you cannot mark the opportunity as close lost because you did not fill in the lost reason. Please fill in the lost reason and click save. So a huge impact on user experience and number of requests that an admin might get. And then obviously in any scenario possible, have that validation rule highlight any sort of cell, any sort of field that would be in question. So in this case, try to highlight the lost reason field. Next, we've got a couple awesome custom fields that we typically use all the time. So the first one is a formula that checks the user ID against some other user field on a record. So it's a really useful formula. It's a yes/no that determines if the person who is looking at the record is the person that the user references. So in the example on the screen, we're looking to see if the person who's looking at the record is the person who created the record. And in this formula, the box would be checked if I was the person that created the record. So with ownership, there is the show me my records. That's fairly easy and obvious. But when it comes to other fields, it's a lot more complicated to try to say, this person has a relationship to me, or this record has a relationship to me, and be able to share that report without having to create a new report for everyone that says, and the ID is this, or the name is this. So using this checkbox field is hugely impactful, especially when you combine it with dynamic dashboards, because then you can have the report run or the dashboard run on behalf of the individual, and have a filter on those reports that says, and the person looking at the report is that person. So now everyone's dynamic dashboards are all personalized to them at scale. So a great example of this for a client of ours is that they tracked the SDR, the AE, implementation owner, and customer success all the way through the life cycle. And they wanted to be able to report for each of those people on where they were in the pipeline. So using this field on each of those custom user fields and having dynamic dashboards set up, that was really easy to do. So that's formula number one. And the next one is case safe ID. So everyone has probably heard of this field because, or run this formula before, because the native ID is 15 characters, but the translation of 15 characters into 18 characters is done through this formula field, which is case safe ID. The problem with this is that it contributes almost half of the total formula size, or the compiled size of the formula. So a bit of a hack or a tip associated to this field is, what you can do is on record creation, run something, either a process builder, or a flow, or a workflow rule, something that will take the ID after create, and then create a text field with this, so that you can leverage the case safe ID within your other formula fields without overburdening those formula fields. And the scheduled flow, if you need to do a backfill your database with case safe IDs, then that new feature for a scheduled flow is a great way to do that. And last one, and I know we only have 1 minute left, is web to case. So, or web to lead, web to case. I'll kind of fly through this here for the sake of time, but we've been working with some clients who are using a significant number of their web to lead functionality, and there's significant drawbacks, and especially when you look to scale, because there's generally 500 leads per 24-hour period, and with cases it's about 5,000. But there's additional functionality that requires a fairly light implementation of code that you can use with sites, and I'd say for the sake of time, if there's any interest in understanding this, go ahead and reach out and we'll schedule something and go through that.
All right, well, thanks, James. That wraps up today's topics then. Thanks to our panel for providing great insights and helpful tips as always. Thanks to our audience for joining us. If you wish to revisit any of the topics, this will be made available on demand on our website shortly. You can follow our social channels for that update. If you sent us a question that we didn't answer fully, please contact us and we'll continue the conversation. Other than that, look out for the next episode and have a great rest of your day.